Hey, what's up there, YouTubers? It's me again, Brian, aka Gamer55551, and I am back with a video review. And for this review, we're going to be taking a look at Playtonic's and Team 17's Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair for the Nintendo Switch. Also available on the PS4, Xbox One, and PC via Steam, but obviously for this review, we're going to take a look at the Switch version. And if you're interested in any gameplay footage whatsoever, I'll have a link in the description. You could check that out. Growing up back in the 80s and the 90s, one of the things I remember during the time of the Super Nintendo era was a game by Rare, at the time when Nintendo purchased Rare, and that was the Donkey Kong Country series. This was a game released back in 1994. Yep, I feel old mentioning it though, and it was a fun game and all. It was a solid 2D platformer, and on top of that, the visuals were really impressive for a Super Nintendo game back then. Kind of like how the original Star Fox was kind of impressive in a way. What made the visuals so impressive about that was they kind of advertised that they were using the same visuals in blockbuster movies like Jurassic Park and Terminator 2, Judgment Day, and so forth. And the game Donkey Kong Country spawned a sequel, Diddy's Kong Quest, which remains one of my favorite entries in the series, and of course Dixie's Kong Double Trouble, which was released near the end of the Super Nintendo's life cycle as the N64 was coming out, and so forth. While I enjoy all three of the games, though, don't get me wrong, I still enjoy Dixie Kong's Double Trouble, and I would like to see those three games making onto the Super Nintendo games on the Nintendo Switch. Diddy Kong Quest has always been a favorite of mine. Fast forward a decade or so later, though, and we're in a different situation where the former employees who worked at Rare at the time went and formed their own studio, and they started by throwing their first Kickstarter back in March of 2015. Full disclosure, I was one of those who backed the game. Was Yooka-Laylee, a game that was a throwback to the era of the whole Banjo-Kazooie during the 3D platform days back in the N64 era. And while the game had its flaws in some areas, I actually enjoyed it though. I mean, granted, I didn't think it was going to give Mario Odyssey a run for its money, but it was still an enjoyable game nevertheless. So it was kind of interesting to hear how Playtonic went back to the drawing board and got us what apparently is a sequel to the first Yooka-Laylee, now entitled Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair. Only this time, taking it in more of a 2D approach in terms of playing it like a 2D platform and so forth. And after investing a couple hours into this, or a couple weeks or a couple days with it, though, I honestly have to say I'm definitely, given the fact that the folks at Playtonic are made up by former members of Rare, you're definitely going to get that Donkey Kong Country vibe out of it, and that's definitely a good thing. So why don't we get started with the pros and cons, and we'll start off first with the pros. And the first one I do want to talk about is the gameplay. This is, to me, I found the gameplay to be fun, enjoyable. It's a solid 2D platforming type of game, or in a way, it's a 2D game with a 3D background and so forth. Kind of like how Donkey Kong Returns and Tropical Freeze was in any way. And like those games, it's a difficult but fun and fair 2D platform, much like how Donkey Kong Return, Tropical Freeze were, New Super Mario Bros. Wii U were, and of course Rayman Legends and Rayman Origins were as well. There are a couple of things that the game does kind of borrow from like Tropical Freeze and Returns that were in, like the original Donkey Kong games. This game is made by those who made those games, where of course finding these coins that you use to pay Trowser, he calls it the paywall and so forth. It's breaking the fourth wall and all that though, but there are basically a ton of collectibles to find in the game, hidden secrets and so forth. The game basically is a 2D platform, but there is a 3D overview. The 3D overview kind of gives off a little bit of the old Legend of Zelda vibe in a way, but it's still strictly a 2D platforming game. But I will say, as far as the gameplay goes, it's a fun, solid 2D platform. Next thing I do want to talk about is the visuals and the music, and they are really good in this game, though. And granted, this is the Switch version we're talking about, so it's not going to look nearly as impressive as, say, what the PS4 and Xbox One or a PC version might look like. That said, though, the visuals and the art style still make up for it, even if the game, I believe, is running at 720p while in dock mode as well. But the big kicker, of course, is the fact that it runs at 60 frames per second. So regardless if you're playing in dock or handheld mode, the game still holds up at 60 frames per second, which is certainly a good thing. And it's nice that Playtonic was able to hit that 60 frames per second. As for the music, dear God, it's really good. I mean, you definitely get a sense of that kind of music that you remember back. That you get that nostalgic feel from the old Donkey Kong Country games to the Banjo-Kazooie games, though. Especially, I think some of the composers, like David Wise, also helped out with this music as well. I like a lot of his music. You kind of got a little bit of that, and this may sound cheesy to some people, but you get a little bit of that Phil Collins, Peter Gabriel, Genesis vibe out of the music, and it's really, really good. The soundtrack alone on this in this game is really good, so I definitely like the music. Visually and the music-wise is good as well. And last but not least is some of the little hidden secrets, particularly the tonics. Basically, in the game, you find these little tonics that look like, the symbol of the company, Playtonics and all. And some of these tonics can be useful. While some are simply for cosmetics, there are some that might be helpful. Like, for example, you might have one where, in the event your character gets hit, Laylee will fly around for a little bit, and you have that moment to try to capture her before she flies up. You won't be able to get access to her until you touch like what basically is a Laylee bill to get Laylee and all that stuff. It's kind of like similar to how with Donkey Kong Country, where basically if one of your characters gets hit, you won't be able to access that character until you find another like Donkey Kong barrel and so forth. So it's kind of similar as well. But there are anyway, back on track, there are certain tonics ranging from that to some taking, like extra hits or anything and so forth, to perhaps maybe, but like something like that. So there are certainly some tonics in the game that are basically useful and so forth. So it is nice to have these tonics there, especially, and it does encourage you to go search every nook and cranny to find them and so forth. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we're going to get to part 2, which are the cons. So we'll take a quick little break, and we will be right back. Okay, and we are back with part 2 of our video review of Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair for the Nintendo Switch, also for PS4, Xbox One, and PC and Steam. So now that I gave you the pros, why don't we get started with the cons? And there are 3 cons I could think of in this game, so why don't we get started then? The first one does have to do with the tonics. Now, as I mentioned in the pros, though, I thought some of the tonics were useful, and there are some pretty useful tonics in the game, though. Although I forgot to mention that some of these tonics, though, if you use them, you won't receive as much. They'll subtract some of the quills you collect in the game, which you need those to not only unlock some of the tonics, but also unlock some of the secrets in the game as well. But that depends on your point of view, whether you think that is a big issue, whether you think that's worth it or not. But in any way, as I mentioned, some of the tonics were useful, but there are some that are kind of a hit and miss, and I just think were either oppressive or didn't really make any sense. Like there's one called the broken Joy-Cons, where they pretty much reverse a lot of the controls and all that stuff, to even some that I think are somewhat impressive, but it looks like mostly just a one-time thing where you can change the graphics to make it look like something off of like the original Game Boy Color, to even ones that look like a summer blockbuster to like a noir, like an old black and white film. These all look nice and all, but at the same time, some of them, like the Game Boy one, drops the frame rate to 30 frames per second, at least based on what I've seen so far. So some of these some of these are okay. Some of these are just maybe for just one time and that's it. And some I just think don't make any sense, like the broken Joy-Cons. But again, that's me, but that's how I see it. So some of the tonics in the game are kind of a hit and miss. The next thing I do want to talk about is the difficult spike in the game, though. Now, as I mentioned before, I mentioned that the gameplay is kind of similar to games like New Super Mario Bros., Wii and U, Donkey Kong Return, Tropical Freeze, and Return and Tropical Freeze, and Rayman Origins and Legends. And personally, I don't have a problem with that. I don't mind that kind of difficulty spike for these 2D platformers. That said, however, there's no denying the fact that the difficulty spike might be an issue for some people. It might be a little too difficult, so it might turn some people off. Again, I personally don't have a problem with these difficulty spikes, but I can understand how some gamers may turn some gamers off. Maybe some of them might be frustrated and all that stuff. I don't know if they'll throw the controller or anything like that, but you know what? If you can handle a game like, say, Cuphead for its difficulty spike, I'm sure you can handle a game like Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair. But again, the difficulty spike might turn some gamers off, though. And last but not least, and I do think it's kind of unfortunate that this isn't added, though, even though it's not a huge big deal, is that there's no two-player mode in this game, though. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm all for single-player games and so forth, and all that, but I also won't deny that there are some games that could benefit from having a multiplayer mode and all that stuff. And I do think it is a little unfortunate that there isn't a two-player mode in Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair. I mean, you couldn't do something where one person plays like the original color of Yooka-Laylee and have another person play a different color of Yooka-Laylee, like a two-player contest similar to what it was in the old rare Donkey Kong Country games back on the Super Nintendo. So it is a little unfortunate you don't have a two-player mode in this game and everything like that. Again, it's not a deal breaker. It doesn't ruin the game or anything like that. I just think it's kind of a missed opportunity for Playtonic and Team 17. Overall, I have to say I am really enjoying Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair. I'm a huge fan of the old 2D platforming games and so forth, and it's nice to see that the former developers who worked at Rare and created the Donkey Kong Country games bring what is basically, in my view, a spiritual successor to those type of games with Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair. The game has a difficulty spike, which for some gamers are going to like, some gamers are not. Some of the tonics are hit and miss, and obviously it would have been nice if they added a two-player mode, but I definitely enjoy the game, especially the music, which is just beautiful in this game. I just really, really like the music in this game. So for me, it's definitely, maybe I'm just an old school gamer, maybe I just like 2D platforms, but for me, this is definitely a recommendation for regardless of what system you pick up. For me, I picked it up for the Nintendo Switch, but if your main system is either a PS4 or an Xbox One or PC via Steam, it's definitely a recommendation in my book. Here's to hoping to see more Yooka-Laylee down the road. I wouldn't mind if they return to do a 3D Yooka-Laylee in the style of what Banjo-Kazooie was, maybe improve in some areas, and here's to hoping to see Playtonic maybe do a spiritual successors to, say, games like Jet Force Gemini, to even GoldenEye and Perfect Dark. I wouldn't mind if they do something like that. If they do something like that in like the foreseeable future. But overall, I enjoyed Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair. And it's definitely a fun game, and it brings back that nostalgic feel that I had when I played the original Donkey Kong Country game back in 1994. Okay, this concludes this video review of Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair for the Nintendo Switch. And again, these are my opinion. What are yours? What are your thoughts about Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair? Is this a game worth picking up? Is this a game worth getting in any way? Are you happy they went with a 2D platformer route, or do you think Playtonic should have gone with like a 3D route similar to games like Banjo-Kazooie was, though? Do you think there are other games or other spiritual successors of games out there that Playtonic should work on? Do you agree with what I said in this video? Do you disagree? Do you have a difference of opinion? As always, sound off in the comment section below. Let me know what you think. And I hope you hit that like button. I would appreciate it. And I hope you do subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you do, make sure you hit the bell icon for notifications of any new videos I put up. Also, feel free to share this video if you want to, and feel free to donate to my channel if you like. You could do it through PayPal Me or Patreon. Links will be in the description of this video. And I will see you again next time when I do another video. Hopefully that'll be soon. Until then, from Southern California, I wish you all a good day then. Bye!